Hello, you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we talk about films we think are underseen, underrated, or sometimes we just want to talk about them, don't we? I'm the host of this week, it's Josh, and I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Alice Oliver. Alice, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Josh. Love's in the air. Right, that's enough, or we'll get fined.
Yeah. It's Valentine's Day, isn't it?
It is.
Romantic, innit?
A beautiful, romantic day.
Yeah. Or not, depending on...
Or not.
Yeah, depending on what you... Listen, even if you're single, treat yourself to a nice meal and make love to yourself. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
That's what we're always saying here.
I've always said
on
that.
Just Films and That. Love yourself, guys.
Love yourself. Are you a Valentine's Day person? You and Mr. Oliver, or are you not asked?
I'm pretty shit at all that stuff, to be honest. Like Valentine's Day anniversaries, it's not that I forget. I just don't really care. And then he'll end up...
About your relationship.
It's about anything, man. I don't care about anything. But then he'll get me like really sweet and really thoughtful gifts. And then I'm like, oh, fuck. So then I usually end up going big for his birthday or for Christmas to kind of make up for it, because his birthday's in March. So what will happen, I can see it happening. Valentine's Day, I'll go, we won't do anything for Valentine's Day, can't be bothered. He'll go, oh, well, I did get you something anyway. And it'll be something really thoughtful and really niche. And I'll go, fuck, now I've really got to knock it out the park for his birthday. I wonder if that's his strategy.
He's one of those guys. I bet, do you set a limit for Christmas and he goes over it?
No, I usually go over. Yeah. I usually go over the limit for Christmas, because once I get started,
because you go quite big on Christmas, don't you?
We have done the past couple of years. Again, though, that's me trying to make up for lost time, because I was a bit of an insufferable douchebag for the first part of our relationship.
Yeah.
So now I'm just trying to really make up for it. Still now. I'm just self-aware about it,
you know about it now.
Okay. What about you? You strike me as a hell of a romantic when you think about some of the films you've picked, Donnie.
You know what? Yeah, I am, but our anniversary is really late January, so because it's only a few weeks before Valentine's Day, we don't go big on Valentine's Day. We tend to just do a card, but we do stuff for our anniversary. So like we'll go out for a meal. We'll go out for a meal, and yeah, I'll get her a card. This year, she forgot. I got her a card and took her out for a meal and got her some flowers. And then the next day, she genuinely went to me, I was going to get you a card after all that, but I still forgot. She was going to get a card because she forgot to get the card that she forgot. So that's
she forgot to get the card she was meant to get because she forgot the card.
That's what I'm dealing with over here. So
that's funny.
Yes, very similar to yourself. So no, we are, listen, for me, romance is a year-round thing, Alice. Do you know what I mean?
Every day, man. You've got to love that person every single day. Even if that person is yourself. That is
exactly. And that brings us on to this week's episode, of course. So this week, it is our Valentine's Day special. So we thought, who better to pick this week's film than you guys out there, our wonderful, lovely, and probably romantic listeners. So we put it out there on Twitter what you guys thought was the most romantic film. We had loads of great suggestions, so thank you very much to everyone who got in touch. We did look at all of them, and between us, we have decided to talk about You've Got Mail. So this one was chosen by @GreenElfOz on Twitter. So I got in touch with them and asked them to tell us a little bit about themselves and why they picked this film. So her name is Karen, and she said this: "My name is Karen. I live in Australia." Hello, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
You've Got Mail is a sweet little movie that I used to own on VHS tape. I love it because of the autumn in New York setting, the markets, the bookshop, the freshly sharpened pencils, the dynamic between the main characters is great. You feel the attraction right away, and they have to work for it throughout the film. Oh, and there's a cute dog. Perfect. So that's what Karen
There's
said.
So many dogs
there
in
is
this
a lot
film.
Of cute dogs
Not
in
only
that film.
have we got Tom Hanks's what I think is a golden retriever, but yes, I swear dogs kept popping up all the time in this film, walking in the parks. Oh yeah, I was there with you, Karen, with the dogs for sure.
Dogs always make a film as well.
I mean, for me, I'm dog crazy.
So that is why Karen chose it. Then, like we said before, we went through all the suggestions and we chose this between us. So Alice, what struck you about this one? Why did you pick it out of all the suggestions?
Well, it's one that I had, obviously, back in the day when we had videotapes and you had the trailers at the beginning of videotapes. And I feel like this was a trailer on the beginning of most of my videotapes.
Right.
But I'd never seen it. And I didn't truly know what it was about. Like, you get a kind of idea, obviously, online relationship, but that's obviously how far it goes in the trailer. So I was definitely intrigued to actually get round to watching this one. What about you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the most high profile film suggested that I hadn't seen. So there was ones I had seen. So like the first one that stood out to me, and apologies, I can't remember who suggested it, was When Harry Met Sally, which is the same writer as this. No, not the same director, same writer. And it is like often considered to be the blueprint for the modern rom-com. So when we talked about Breakfast at Tiffany's, it came up then because Breakfast at Tiffany's is often considered to be the blueprint for all rom-coms, or a lot of them. And then when Harry Met Sally came along, it was a little bit of a game changer. And I think then that move forward, and things have changed, and there's other films that have come out, like we've touched on, things like Bridesmaids and Richard Curtis films and stuff like that. But anyway, so I thought about choosing that, but then you mentioned this one and I hadn't seen it, and I thought, well, do you know what, let's do that one. Plus, I don't think, although I'm happy to be corrected, I don't think that we've done a Tom Hanks film before.
I mean, I don't think we have, but we've made this mistake before.
We have done with Christian Bale.
Didn't do a Christian Bale film. So I don't think we have.
But if anyone could go through all of the episodes we've done and let us know if we've done a Tom Hanks film. Anyway, so that's why we chose it. So in terms of a synopsis, if you haven't seen You've Got Mail, it's basically a Cinderella story for adults.
Yes, it is. It is.
So Tom Hanks he works for a big book chain. Meg Ryan, she works for, she has her own independent bookshop. They're talking to each other online, anonymously, falling for each other online. Hence the You've Got Mail title, because if you don't know, kids listening out there, when you used to get an email, if you had an AOL email address, it went ping, you've got mail. That brings back memories. Anyway, so they're talking to each other, and in the meantime, in their real professional lives, they have a little bit of interaction, don't get on, and it's your standard rom-com. It goes from there, and I'm not really going to say much more about it. Like Karen said, it's set in New York, which is a big part of it. So, well, let's get stuck into it then. So the question is, obviously, we'll go through it and talk about what we liked and didn't like, but we also need to know at the end, is it romantic? Is it the most romantic film you've ever seen? Which is obviously subjective, but we'll try and have a look at it anyway. So Alice, you haven't seen this before. What did you think? What did you like about it?
So I went into this with pretty low expectations, I'll be honest. I was like, oh my goodness, how is this going to have aged? What is the script going to be like? I was, because the trailer that I'd seen so many times as a kid made it look pretty damn naff. So I was like, okay, we'll give it a go, but I have not got high expectations for this. But I was pleasantly surprised, and I liked it so much more than I thought I would. What about you, Josh? Before I get stuck in, I want to know kind of what your general feelings were about it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, isn't it, when you see a film trailer? Because I suppose when you're a kid, you're a bit like, ugh, rom-coms, aren't you? So maybe I wonder if that's had any bearing on it for you.
Maybe.
What did I think? Overall, yeah, similar to you. I wouldn't say I went in with low expectations. I went in with expectations that were met, but that wasn't a reflection on the quality of the film. Overall, yeah, I think I enjoyed it. There's stuff I didn't like and stuff I did like, but most of all,
you think
I'd say,
you enjoyed it? That's interesting.
Yeah,
so I reckon, from the sounds of it, I think I might have liked this more than you did. I wasn't seeing that coming.
I'd probably say the positives outweigh the negatives. But go on,
Okay.
what did you? Let's hear it then. You seem to have liked it, which I'm quite surprised about.
Yeah, I'm surprised too.
She's such a cold-hearted person.
I know, I'm miserable. I'm miserable through and through.
Hate everything.
I do. But I hate that I hate everything, and I wish I didn't. But I did like this film. So I like the story, I like the characters, and I like the story and character development. Because to begin with, it feels like two people who are in what seem to be quite serious relationships, having this inappropriate relationship with strangers online. So they're not immediately very likable because of that. And then especially Tom Hanks's character, who at the beginning is portrayed like this corporate villain. Like, he says about the company that he works for and the customers, like, we're going to sell them cheap books and stimulants. But then as the story progresses and you get to know them, they become really likable people who are written really well. And we get to know their partners as well. And you start to feel like that they're just not a good match, as opposed to them like being sort of deceptive or, emotionally cheating on their partners or whatever. So in some ways, it reminded me a little bit of I Give It a Year, because it's like you go on this journey with these characters and you get to the end and it's like, oh no, they're just not right for each other. They've tried with these other people, with Patricia and Frank.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't work out. So I thought that was really interesting, and I was really sort of invested in the story as it developed. So I think it's written really nicely. I think there's clues to who the characters are as people in the script, and it feels and flows a lot like quite natural and normal dialogue. So you get some exposition dumping, obviously, when they're writing the emails to each other, but for the most part, I thought the script really held up. But there's some really nice touches throughout the film as well that help to tell the story. So Birdie, who works with Kath, who's Meg Ryan's character in the bookshop, she keeps a photo of Kath's dead mum in a locket around her neck. So you get an idea of how close they were, even though that's not really something that's discussed in the film until much nearer the end.
It's not even part of the plot, is it? It's just one of those little... And I think that those touches in a film like this are what elevate it above other rom-coms that aren't perhaps as well received, which is, I think for me, like you said, it's all about that script. Because like you say, they're both with other people at the start, and they seem to be having this online relationship, which raises questions of, like you say, is it dishonest? Is it almost like an infidelity? But actually, they're just emailing each other, so technically they've probably not done anything wrong. But certainly now it will probably be seen as being wrong. But I don't know. But like you said, the script is the star here, and I... Back to what you said there, I really like the dialogue as well. One that really, there's some really good bits of dialogue, like you say, character development dialogue, but also dialogue that like has a little bit of zing to it. So there's a bit where he's talking about, Tom Hanks is talking about his partner, Patricia, played by Parker Posey, and he says Patricia makes coffee nervous, which I really like, which obviously is like that idea that she's so highly strung and so... so almost, I don't know, high functioning or whatever it is he's trying to say, that she makes coffee nervous. And I thought that was not that I need to explain it, but I thought that was a really nice touch. So yeah, I thought for me, the script really was one of the stars of the film.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of that goes on because we get introduced to... there's a scene quite near the beginning where Tom Hanks's character Joe he's like this boardroom or whatever of his place of work, and about halfway through the scene he refers to the man who's clearly in charge as Dad, and that's the first hint, or the first sort of reveal that you get, like, oh my goodness, he's not only does he work for this massive sort of corporate company, he's the son of the CEO. And it's not like it was put into the script just so naturally. It wasn't forced in there. It wasn't just like, oh, hey, Dad, how are you doing? Just to make sure that we know that this guy is the son of the CEO. It just dropped in there like casual conversation. And this happened throughout the whole thing. And it's just a really nice way to develop your characters without really like shoehorning things in there or putting things front and center for your audience. It's trusting your audience, isn't it? And we like that.
Yeah, I think the trick, one of the things it does, and what a lot of good scripts do, is you feel like you're watching this particular story in these characters' lives, but that they existed before the story started and that life goes on after the story finished. Whereas a lot of times it's like, particularly with rom-coms, but with any film, they feel the need to bombard you with exposition so you know everything at the beginning, then wrap it up almost too much at the end, as if and then they lived happily ever after and you don't need to know anymore because they're not real people. Do you know what I mean? Whereas good scripts like this and other films we've talked about very much go, oh no, they existed beforehand, this happened, and then they existed afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think that's, like you say, it's not spoon-feeding your audience, it's that right amount of showing, because we always say, show don't tell, but there is an element of balancing the two, and I think that's what this film does really well. It does tell you that his dad is his dad, but it doesn't overly, in the hands of a less skilled writer, it'd have him just outwardly saying it in his dialogue. So like, when I started this company with my father and my grandfather, you know what I mean? Whereas he just goes, Dad, and you're like, oh right. So it's balancing it, and it's not it's trusting your audience enough and not trusting your audience too much, and sort of getting it right, getting that balance right. And I think that's it's difficult, but I think that's poised well for the whole film.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's pretty funny. So there's a few well-written jokes in there, like when Joe sees himself appear on the television at the gym and he says, hey, here's a good-looking guy. And then you've got some funny scenarios between the characters.
I do that every Friday at 6 hours.
There we go. Local TV every Friday, 6 p.m. Keep an eye out for me and Josh, especially Josh. He's a good-looking guy.
I'm always on the treadmill as well.
I believe it. So Kath and Joe's partners, when they meet for the first time, so Patricia and Frank, it turns out that Patricia is like a massive fan of Frank because he's a writer / journalist. And then she starts like fangirling all over him, and that was pretty amusing. And then Frank in general, I do find quite a funny character. He has a lot of funny moments, a lot of funny lines, and he delivers them really well. Like he's really anti-tech, isn't he? He says things like, name one good thing that technology's ever done for us. And that sort of thing is just quite amusing. And then you've got Joe's dad's partner, Gillian, who keeps being really inappropriate with Joe. Like he goes to kiss her on the cheek and she tries to kiss him on the lips, and then she's got her hand on his knee and stuff. And it's like, just like these great little layers and the sort of strength, I suppose, of the characters around them. Like, yeah, it's about Meg and Tom. Obviously, they're the big names on the poster. But everyone else is quite nicely developed and sort of has a bit of their own thing.
Isn't it? It's quite like, so there's a little joke in there about the fact that both his dad, and I'm not sure if it specifically says it, but I think it's his dad and his granddad, isn't it? Have both got a tendency to, shall we say, get married every couple of years, but the wives stay the same age.
Yeah.
And so there's a joke in it that his dad and granddad have sort of continued to have children, as they've got older, so that Tom Hanks has two little children with him who he's looking after, but there is that actually his brother and his auntie. Is it his half brother, his auntie or something? And he makes a joke at the bookshop about like they say they're your kids, and he goes, no, like the 5-year-old one is my auntie, and the 8-year-old one is my brother.
That's true. Oh my God, that went so over my head. Oh my God.
But it's little touches like that flesh out, it doesn't add anything to the story, but it fleshes out the world so that it feels, more real, or more like like you're watching a wider thing. And I think that's what those touches of those fleshing out of those characters in that world are what makes it a decent film. Like they like, that's how they feel like, not necessarily, well, I suppose they do feel like real people, but I think that's what really keeps you engaged.
Yeah, I think so. And just finally then, so I think it's quite moving as well in a way that I just wasn't expecting. So you've got, first of all, the relationship between everyone who works at the shop around the corner, which is Kath's bookshop. They seem to be genuinely friends with each other. They're really likable people, and they're all quite funny and unique in their own right. And then you've got
Rhode Island from Miss Congeniality.
Oh, that's where I recognise
It's the only other thing I've seen her in. I was waiting for it to be like April 22nd. All you need is a light jacket.
It's April 25th, Josh.
Oh my God, I'm
goodness.
sorry.
How many times have you watched that film? No, the only reason I know it's April 25th is because that is my mum and dad's wedding anniversary.
And that's why they picked that date, wasn't it?
Yeah, it must have been. So you've got those guys who've got all their relationships in the shop, and I think they're all really sweet. And then you've got this storyline of grief that comes up every now and then throughout the film. So the bookshop used to be Kath's mum's, who is dead. And sometimes Kath will bring it up in the emails that she's sending to Joe. And there's one point where she's decorating a Christmas tree, and she says it makes her think of her mum and that she misses her so much that she almost couldn't breathe. And I thought that was a really touching moment. And then again, a bit later on, she eventually sells the shop, and she says that it's like her mum died all over again. And I quite like this element of the narrative. I think it helps explain why she might be sticking in a relationship that isn't 100% right for her, and then maybe looking for comfort, from this internet stranger. So I like that you get that bit of backstory about her. And again, it's not a film all about her mum being dead and she talks about it all the time. There's literally just a couple of moments where she obviously feels so overwhelmed with the grief that she feels like she has to share that with Joe. And I thought it was really nice. Like, it's something... Yeah,
it is.
It must be relatable for so many people. And I just thought that was really sweet.
Yeah.
It really got me, that too.
I think, and I think it comes back to that world building, like we said. There are films about grief. If you look at something like Reign Over Me, which we'll probably come back to because of for reasons we'll discuss later on, that is very much a film about sort of grief. And it's about one thing, and it does do a good job of balancing that. But at the same time, it's very much there to address grief. Whereas it's the whole thing. This is, these are real people with real backstories, real lives, and so it feels a little bit more fleshed out. And so as a result of that, I think you can engage more with the characters on a realer level. I'd probably say.
So those were the main things for me, Josh. So what about you? Is there anything you like that we didn't cover there?
Yeah. So when I said when I said it met my expectations, that wasn't a negative thing. I went into it expecting what it was, which was a well-made rom-com. So it was very much a film carried on the likability of and sort of chemistry of the two leads. Obviously, I think this is the third film they've made together by this time, because they've done Joe versus the Volcano and Sleepless in Seattle. So they're both really likable, which is specifically with Tom Hanks's character is a testament to him, because he is Mr. Likable. He is Mr. Everyman. That's one of the things he's built his career on. He's one of those actors that seems to be able to do everything. He can do comedy, he can do serious, he can do all sorts. And if you think about his character and the actions of his character in this film, he shouldn't be as likable as he is, but he is. And that comes down to the script and how they're fleshed out. Like I said, we've already touched on the script, so I won't go into it much more. All I will say is there was a really interesting element that it brought up, which is their sort of personal relationship versus their professional relationship, and the problems that anonymity brings in terms of their contradictory lifestyles. And another thing I thought was really interesting was that what you see in this is characters who aren't right for each other, a little bit like I Give It a Year. Characters who aren't right for each other, just having a really amicable breakup.
Yeah, so mature, just so kind of self-aware, because it's just Kath and Frank are just they're in like a restaurant or a diner or something, and they're like, I don't love you. And she's like, oh, I don't love you either. And then it's like this sort of relief, because it's almost, and again, similar to I Give It a Year, it's almost like, oh, are they playing relationship chicken? Are they just wait to see if the other one runs first, or do they actually love them? And it's like, you're in this like confusing sort of mess. And then it's just that relief of, oh, you're not feeling this either. Thank God. I thought there was something wrong with me. Yeah. And then when she eventually does get with Joe at the end, like, she's so happy, because like he turns up and it's like, oh my God, you are the person that I was speaking to. And she says like, I so wanted it to be you. I so wanted it to be you. So it's just nice, and it's just lovely, so nice.
It is. It's a lovely, it's lovely in that sense, isn't it? So it's again, I said I'd probably touch on this with Rain Over Me. It's one of those films where the setting is really important. New York. New York is probably the most cinematic city. It's probably you're going to say it's New York, LA, or Paris, maybe London. Those but when you think of cinematic, big films, New York's got to be up there, hasn't it? And it very much is a character in this, and the way it's made a character, a little bit like what Karen touched on in her email in a message, was that it goes through the seasons. So it's set over a period of time. So you see autumn, and you see Thanksgiving, and you see Christmas, and you see, and that, not only is it good because it shows the passage of time, but with the changing of the seasons, you get the changing of that color palette, and it really shows New York off. And I think it just elevates the film a little bit, and it does make it feel a little bit more romantic as well. Good music as well. I thought there was some good music in there. So you've got that plinky plonky score that you got in 90s rom-coms. But I also, for example, Dreams by the Cranberries, they use that in this. Great song for establishing characters. It's quite often used, I think, in films and TV to show, this is either the end of, this is a new start, or this is your characters. You see your characters. Do you know the song I mean?
I don't know if I do, to be honest. I might do if I heard it.
It's used a lot in Derry Girls because it's the Cranberries. Right. So obviously they're an Irish band, and they sing a lot about that sort of stuff. So yeah, for me overall, really enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. I didn't mean to do it a disservice when I said it met my expectations. And my expectations were high, and it went and they were met, is what I meant.
There you go. That's all we could ask for.
Okay, so let's move on then to talking about things that we didn't like about the film, or that perhaps we would change about the film. I mean, you seem to be quite glowing about this. I didn't think
really?
I wasn't sure how you'd take it, but I'm quite.
Neither did I.
I mean, I didn't pick it, but it's pleasant. I'm pleasantly surprised on behalf of the listener, if anything. Was there anything you didn't like though?
So there were a couple of things, but not major offenders. But Meg Ryan's I'm typing an email acting is so bad. So she's so overly animated, like her head is moving about all over the place. She makes really big movements with her hands and her arms and does loads of facial expressions. And I don't need any of that because you've got her in a monologue narrating what she's writing. So I don't need this sort of these fake expressions of feeling. It felt really unnatural and was pretty distracting. And I just wanted her to stop. The other thing as well was, so Joe obviously spends a lot of time with what I've written down to be his niece and his nephew, but obviously it's his aunt and his like half brother or whatever.
I'm not 100. Yeah,
his weird family tree.
100% of what they are, but he does, unless when he says it, he's being sarcastic. But the joke I got was that
I thought it was like a flirty joke with Kath.
Maybe
It was like, oh yeah, she's my aunt, but I think she actually might be.
Yeah, what I got was that his dad and his granddad just keep
having kids,
younger women, and so they keep having kids, so that she actually is his aunt, but she's like 8.
Yeah, exactly. But then Kath probably thinks it's a joke, but then that's what makes it all the funnier. So yeah, I think you're probably right. So he's at like a carnival or at the fair or something with them, and they win goldfish in bags. And I just fucking hate it so much. They used to do this in fairs when I was a kid.
Yeah, same.
I hated it then, and I hate it now. Please, everyone, leave the fish in the rivers, in the lakes, in the oceans where they belong. You don't need fish, and you don't need to win them as prizes at a freaking fair. And I just hate it so much.
But if you were at a fair, right, and you've left the fish, they're fine, they're happy. I think the important thing to ask is what colour candy floss would you get?
So I don't really like candy floss because I don't like the way it makes my teeth feel. But
something wonderful and magical. Alice doesn't like it.
I like having all my teeth in my mouth.
I'll tell you what Alice will have.
Not rotting.
A sweet potato wrap. Or something like that.
Yes, please. Whole meal. Yeah. But no, if blue candy floss was ever available, I would go for that. Because you've got to go blue. I love blue stuff, you know.
If you're a kid and you want to go absolutely mental and bounce off walls and ceilings, it's all about the blue candy floss, isn't it? Anyway, sorry, what else did you like? Apart from the fish in the bag. I would have thought, because you don't like fish, I would have thought you'd love to see them in a sandwich bag.
So it's a double whammy. I don't like fish anyway as a phobia, and I don't like animal cruelty. And you've got both those things going on right there. So I couldn't live without that. And just finally, and just slightly the opposite of what you said, but the biggest offender for me is the fucking music. I hated it. It did my head in. Not the soundtrack. Soundtrack was fine.
The score.
But the score was, it was just infuriating. So it's used in the same way that it would be used for a film that has a bad script or bad actors, or a film that they feel needs to handhold the audience all the way, and it mostly just felt totally unnecessary. It was too prominent, it was too big, and it was too distracting. Like Kath and Joe would be having an email conversation, and for me it felt really clear what emotions they're trying to convey, right? Through the script, through the delivery, through their performance. I then don't need this massive score to go, oh, they're saying sad things now, you better feel sad, or oh, they're saying romantic things. I just didn't need it, Josh, and I know that I pick apart scores a lot just because I noticed them so much, but in this I noticed it so badly, and I was like, I think if this had been the film that I thought it was going to be, then fine, maybe you need that music to cover up all the gaps and to cover up all the slow or the bad bits or whatever, but it wasn't. The film was better than I thought it was going to be, and so I just don't think it needs that music. And I feel like it's almost like the filmmaker or, you know, the studio or whoever showed it to someone, and they were like, oh, well, it's not very romantic, is it? And it's like, well, it is. And it's like, but there wasn't any music in it. Where was the romantic music? And it's like, oh,
where's
no,
the plinky plonky piano? I need plinky plonky piano.
It's in the words, it's in the feelings, it's in the emotions, and I got it. So I just didn't need the music at all. But that was it for me. Those were the only 3 things that I didn't really like about this film, or that I would change. So what about you, Josh? Where are you at with this?
A couple of things. Nothing massive. I mean, with the score, I was neither here nor there on the score. I suppose what I meant was I did quite like a couple of soundtrack choices.
Soundtrack was fun.
So the first thing that leaped out at me is it is immediately dated.
Okay, in what way? Go on.
Well, it's not necessarily a criticism, but speaking objectively, if you it did date immediately. So I looked at the opening titles, you know, and it's like a 3D model of New York, and it goes through New York. And all I could think was, someone's had that idea, and I bet it cost loads of money, and now it looks like a fucking screensaver.
Oh, but if you put your mind back into, like, when did this film come out?
Like
Was it late 90s, early?
Late 90s, yeah.
Late 90s, right? So, because I put myself back in that brain, and I was like, for the time, this is really impressive. And you wouldn't have seen much like it before, I don't think.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I know
obviously
what you mean.
now, the dial-up sound.
Yeah, so there's I suppose the fact that it says you've got mail, and the way that they're typing their emails as if it's this newfangled thing immediately dates it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because you can still watch like Pride and Prejudice or whatever, and read older books, and it's not that you're going, well, just send each other a text. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, all could be avoided if they just had their mobile phones.
It's just something I noticed. It wasn't necessarily a criticism, although I would say, well, it is a little dated, again, in terms of the costumes and the hair and the makeup. Like, even if you look at, say, Meg Ryan's hair or Tom Hanks's like clothes, like there's so many like boxy suits, like late 90s boxy suits in this. But you know what? There are plenty of dated films from earlier than this. There are plenty of dated films after this with troublesome language in them. So that's not necessarily a criticism. It's just something I noticed. The main thing, I suppose, is Tom Hanks's character a little bit manipulative? Because he learns who she is. She doesn't know who he is until the end. And in the interim, he chooses not to tell her. And sort of manipulate her and play... He almost plays himself off against himself.
Yes. So I was thinking about this as well, sort of as the film was happening. But for me, this might have just been because, I was already into the film and I was invested or whatever. The way I read it was that he was so sure that she would hate him if she knew it was him. It's like, oh God, if she just thinks that I'm just Joe Fox, the big corporate guy who wants to destroy all the little mom and pop stores on the street. I think the impression I got was that he liked her so much that he was like, I can't let her find out yet, because that will be the end of it. Yeah. So it's like he tried to sort of, I think you are right, because even as I'm saying it now, he did try to control the situation and try to sort of get himself in a position where he could be ready to let her know, and know that she is ready to hear it, and that she wouldn't just shut him down immediately. So it is a little bit controlling and it is a little bit manipulative, but I don't think that his intentions were cruel, and I don't think they were malicious. I think he did it out of fear. I think he was genuinely scared, like if she finds out, she's just gonna like disregard everything.
So what you're saying is it's okay for men to manipulate women?
Well, no.
I obviously, I'm joking. I completely get what you said, and it wasn't like when people say it about things like About Time, which still has a good place in my heart, but I do completely get that idea. I do completely get that he essentially uses his power to manipulate him into becoming his partner, and it's not as bad as that. The other thing I wanted to see what you thought about this was: would you even entertain spending time with him if he put your shop out of business? Like it's your mum's shop, and he willingly knows that and puts her out of business, and it's a bit like, it's just business, like, and so she's like, I'd be like, no, your massive company put my little bookshop out of business when it didn't need to.
Do you mean after she finds out who he is?
Yeah, like would you, or is it meant to be that she's fallen in love with him? Like, how would you quantify that in your head? Your sort of love and chemistry with this person, but also knowing this, it'd be like falling in love with someone who killed a relative.
I think.
Do you know what I mean?
Like, I got dark really quickly.
Do you know what I mean? Though it's like
the way that I think they were trying to design it, or at least some of the way that I interpreted it, was that she sort of needs to leave the shop behind.
Right.
I think Birdie says something about it where it's like, by being here and by having this shop, you're really holding on to your mum and to the memory of your mum. Yeah. And it's not about forgetting, but it is about moving on. And I think Birdie says something quite enlightening, and I can't remember what it was, but it's something about how, about change being good and it about opening new
Doesn't
opportunities.
she say something
and you
about
get to
how
be a
your
different...
mum wouldn't care? Doesn't she say something like your
Maybe.
mum wouldn't, your mum would want you to leave it behind. She wouldn't want you to be stuck in I can't remember what she says. I know what you mean. I suppose, because what she does do is she goes on to write children's books, doesn't she? So perhaps, because the only hint you get that she likes children's stories is that she does story time in the shop.
She reads to the kids, yeah.
So maybe,
she's so sweet.
maybe we needed a little bit more of that and a little bit more relief when the shop was closed to sort of balance out against the fact that Tom Hanks is like, it's business time.
Yeah, because when the shop does close, she does say, like I said before, it feels like my mum died all over again.
That's what I mean. It's so linked to her mum that if a man came along and was like, it's just business, I'm putting you out of business, let's go out, would you be like, oh yeah, that is fine? Or would you?
But he's rich, Josh. He's rich beyond her wildest dreams.
Do you know what it is? They seem to be a really wealthy family at the head of a conglomerate, but they're all like just living in a little flat. Like, he must be a millionaire, and he seems to be. But then also you get the hint that they're all living with their partners, and they don't actually have anywhere that they themselves live. They just
except for their boats. Except for their boats that get progressively bigger.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But that was it from me. Nothing massive. Overall, yeah, I enjoyed it. Okay, then. So let's move on to talking about the critical reception, and then we'll try and decide, is it the most romantic film ever made? So, Alice, now, you've had a very positive reaction to this. So how do you think it did critically?
Well, I'm leaning towards it being quite highly rated because obviously Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, whatever they were doing at the time was working. I think this film would have really sort of slotted in nicely to what was happening in cinema at the time. I think you've got to go at like mid-sevens. I feel like it's got to go at least a mid-7. I'm going to say a 7.4 or a 74%.
And what would you give it?
Maybe just a tiny bit lower than that, like literally just a tiny bit lower than that, like maybe a low 7, like 7.1, 7.2. Okay. But definitely, this is definitely at least a 7 for me, and I don't say that often.
No, you
I?
don't. You don't.
For me, listeners, 7 is good. If something is a 7, it's good.
And Alice 7 is a Josh 8.5.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that.
So at the time of recording, over on IMDb, it gets 6.7 out of 10. Okay. So a little bit lower than we thought. The audience on Rotten Tomatoes give it 73%. Ooh. And the critics give it 70%. Ooh. Which averages out at bang on 70% or 7 out of 10. So it's more or less what we said. Okay. It's a little bit lower. So for me, I would say I'd give it about a 7.7 out of 10. I think it was a decent film. But based on what you've said, perhaps it is underrated.
So I think that is a tiny bit underrated.
Smidge.
I think a little bit. If we'd just gone into the 7s, like a 7.1, 71, 72 or whatever, I think I'd feel a bit more, that makes sense. But as it only just hit the 7 and that's 6.7 on IMDb.
That's low, isn't it?
I am surprised by that. I think it's a little bit underrated, What about you?
If we say it's a smidge underrated and call it...
Tiny bit. It is just
underrated.
A tiny bit. Yes.
Smunderated. So it is underrated. Okay, so it's underrated, but the big question is... Well, is it the most romantic film?
It's not.
It's not. It is pretty damn romantic.
It's pretty romantic, and you know what? What is key in romantic films is that you're rooting for both those individuals.
Yes.
And I was rooting for both those individuals. Took me a while, obviously, with Joe because he starts out a bit ropey and you're not sure what he's about, but he does have more depth to him than you perhaps initially think. And I am rooting for those characters, and I'm happy when they get together at the end. I don't think it's the most romantic film I've ever seen, but it is certainly undeniably romantic, I think. What about you?
Yeah, I'd agree, because I think it's not only is it romantic because it is a romantic comedy, but it's also romantic in the way it portrays New York, the way it seems, the way the characters talk about philosophy and love and life. It has a romantic sentiment that runs throughout the film that is outside of that relationship between the characters. Do you know what I mean? So that probably elevates it. So yeah, for me, it's not the most romantic film ever made, but that is a definitively subjective thing. Like we've touched on a little bit. That can be down to a relationship between you and your partner at the time, a memory. So it definitely is a romantic film, and I definitely think it's well worth a watch if you're looking for a romantic film to watch this Valentine's Day, Alice.
There we go, and that was the whole point. So there we go. You've Got Mail, pretty damn romantic. Maybe not the most romantic film we've ever seen, but a little bit underrated. So it's ticked that box of the podcast, hasn't it?
Indeed. Definitely worth a watch, we think.
Yes, I would certainly say so. So, Josh, here we go. My favourite time of the week. What are we going to be watching next time?
You're either going to love this or you're going to fucking hate me.
Like with most of your choices, let's be honest, but there we go.
Ding diddling ding 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 diddling ding 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 ding.
Mission Impossible? I'm
Right.
only messing. I'm only messing.
Next week we're going to be touching on the old James Bond franchise.
Okay.
We are going to be talking about The World Is Not Enough.
All rightio then.
Yes,
there we are.
And I can see you're raring to go on that one.
I feel like I'm holding a pretty neutral stance here, Josh. I don't think you can tell what I'm thinking one way or the other.
Indeed. Well, we'll see. We'll see what you think next week. So yes, join us next week. We're going to be talking about The World Is Not Enough. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, you'll find us. Drop us a message. We like to see you. We like to hear from you. And thank you very much for listening. And of course, if you haven't already heard, we're on Patreon. So head over to Patreon. Loads of stuff there. It's just for Films and That on Patreon. You can get there's a couple of tiers on there, starting at £2, working their way up. Extended episodes, bonus content, episodes a day early, few other bits on there. Any support you can give us will be massively appreciated. But of course, just listening to us is brilliant. Thank you very much for listening. And I tell you where else you can find us on your telly box, Alice.
Indeed, every Friday evening from 6 p.m, you can find us on the local TV network talking about all our favourite underrated and underseen films. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the north east of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. That is every Friday from 6 p.m.
Yes, lots of ways to hear us, see us, get in touch. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye from me. Cheerio!
Bye!